Hi, welcome back to this channel. In my previous video, we discussed the rumor that has been going around that banks are collapsing, withdraw your money. Banks are collapsing, withdraw your money. And in that video, I also told you guys that rumor ends when it reaches the ears of a wise person. Now, I'd like to bring wisdom. I would like us to ooze wisdom in this video. In this video, I would like us to demystify the possible source of this rumor that banks are collapsing, withdraw your money. Like I told you, rumor ends when it reaches the ears of a wise person. But before we get into the source of this rumor, before we actually get into the nitty-gritties of whether banks are collapsing or not, please press the subscribe button on your screen. Press the subscribe button so that YouTube can push out this video to more people to avoid panic, and also so that more people can be enlightened and can be informed on the state of their deposits in their banks. Have you subscribed? Thank you. Now, as we all know, banks are regulated by CBK, the Central Bank of Kenya, right? And there's a requirement, there are certain requirements that banks are expected to play on or to operate on. Part of these requirements is they must be having a threshold. There's a threshold that has been set for banks to hold their core capital at. For instance, until the year 2008, ideally until the year 2012, banks were required to have at least 250 million as their capital, their core capital. But in 2008, that amount was increased to 1B. And banks were given 2008 up to 2012 to increase that core capital level from 250 million to 1B. That was a 400% increase in core capital level requirement for banks. At the point when that was happening, some banks were at the 250, were below the 1B new threshold. So these banks which were below the 1 billion threshold were given time to increase that amount. Some banks had mergers and acquisitions. Other banks raised money from their shareholders. Now, that's what happened last time. During that time, there was no collapse in the banking industry. The banking industry remained stable during the period 2008 and 2012. And don't tell me about Imperial Bank collapse because that happened in 2015. During the period 2008 and 2012, the banking industry was quite stable. Now, it's that happened during that period which is happening now. Only it's happening after 3 banks were put in receivership in 2015. And out of these 3 banks which were put in receivership in 2015, only one bank, Dubai Bank, was due to liquidity issues. The other 2 were due to management issues, mismanagement, corporate governance. So that will not speak to the banking industry now. Now, last year, there was a proposal to increase this core capital level, the threshold, from 1 billion to 10 billion. So that means that the banks which presently have a core capital level which is less than 10 billion needs to work towards raising additional capital to reach the 10 billion new threshold. And how could bank raise this capital? Through mergers and acquisitions. Yeah? Mergers is where 2 different banks become one bank. They combine their resources to become one bank. And we have seen such mergers. Commercial Bank of Africa, CBA, and NIC Bank merged to become one bank, which is now NCBA. Another merger we have witnessed in the recent past was CFC Bank and Stanbic Bank becoming CFC Stanbic, right? Now, another strategy that banks would employ to meet this threshold will be through acquisition. And we have seen banks being acquired. Like Gyro Bank was acquired by I&M Bank. Oriental Commercial Bank was acquired by M-Orient, is now M-Orient Bank. What happens when there's a merger or an acquisition? What happens to your money? It remains intact. The people who are likely to be affected will be the employees of that bank. there's a high possibility that there will be some staff reduction, but your deposits remain the same. The depositors of Gyro Bank became depositors of I&M Bank, and they continued to operate the account seamlessly at I&M Bank. The customers of CBA Bank and the customers of NIC Bank became the customers of NCBA Bank, and they continue to access or to enjoy their credit facilities or the deposits that they had with these different banks with NCBA Bank. No money was lost. So there's absolutely no reason for you to withdraw your money. Now, those are two strategies that banks can employ in order to raise additional capital to meet that required threshold of 10 billion. I told you rumor ends when it reaches the ears of a wise person, and I'm doing this video to make you that wise person today. Another strategy that banks can employ in order to meet this threshold is to raise additional capital through shares or through bonds. This year, housing finance had a rights issue. Why do you think they had that rights issue? To raise additional capital. And why are they raising additional capital? I don't know too. You tell me in the comment section. Another strategy that banks can use or can employ to raise additional capital is through retained earnings. Retained earnings. Now, banks can work towards improving their efficiency, increase their profits, and instead of paying out dividends to their shareholders, they retain these profits. The retained earnings or the retained profits would add into the bank's capital. Okay? Another strategy that the banks could use is getting a strategic investor, and they will have a mode of operation of how much the investor will be bringing in, and after what duration of time the investor will be receiving back its investment after this bank has improved on its operations and reached the required capital level, such that even if this investor was to exit, the bank will not be shaken. However, this must also be approved by CBK. Will Kenya be the first bank that increases its core capital level? Of course not. Our neighbor across the border, Uganda, increased its core capital requirement from 25B to 15B. Alright, that was just last year in November. Nigeria increased its requirement this year in March. Japan had increased. I think in 2019, I can't remember when Japan increased theirs. South Africa increased theirs in 2019. Tanzania is in the process of increasing their core capital requirement level. So why are countries increasing their bank's core capital level? What is there for you? Now, number one, it means that when a bank has a higher core capital level, it means that this bank can finance bigger projects. And when the private sector can have access to huge loans, it means that the private sector can take up bigger projects, and that then means that the country will be able to develop exponentially. Right? Another reason for an increase in core capital level is that banks with huge core capital levels can stand the test of time. They can stand volatile environment, can stand stressful environment without having to sink down. All right? So a higher core capital level is a shield to banks, and it reduces the risk of bank failures. So it is a good thing for you and for me, or for the economy, for banks to have a higher core capital level. It is a good thing for us when the government increases the required core capital level. I watched a video where one of the renowned financial advisors said that you guys follow, said that one of the strategies that a bank will employ, that one of the options available for the banks will be to go to KDIC to be put in receivership. Really? Really? You guys need to be conscious with the kind of content that you consume. Don't unnecessarily spread panic. don't cause unnecessary panic in the country. These rumors that you guys spread, like I told you, zitatuuma. The banking industry is stable. It is stable. Yeah? And even as CBK is increasing this threshold from 10 billion, from 1 billion to 10 billion, it is fully aware. It is fully aware that there are certain banks which are not having the 10 billion now. It is also fully aware of the effects of putting a bank in receivership. As a matter of fact, back in 2015, when Dubai Bank was put in receivership, and then Imperial Bank was put in receivership, and then Chase Bank was put in receivership, have you noticed that no other bank has been put in receivership? Even though we all know that there's one bank whose core capital level is below the required 1 billion threshold, and it's not been put in receivership. You guys need to be cautious of the content that you guys consume. All right? See you on the next video. And don't forget to subscribe.